Hi there, and welcome on the journey to transform culture. I'm Steve, and I'll be your guide. Well, folks, hope you're having a fantastic day and an even better week. Folks, today we're going to jump in talking about purposelessness to purposefulness, right? I'm going to talk about the leap between the two, but we've got to jump in talking about purposelessness first, right? Easy for me to say, right? Think about it. Purposelessness, purposefulness. What's the key word in either of these? Less, right? Lacking of purpose, right? And full of purpose, right? So these are the two sides of the proverbial coin, if you will. But let's talk a little bit about purposelessness to kind of get things started. I found in my journey through life, so far, personally and professionally, that purposelessness, and which can also have things tied to it, like boredom, listlessness, apathy, usually the things that kind of, but could also be things like anxieties and a bunch of things of this nature, can all be kind of rooted back to purposelessness. If you think about it, I remember being a teenager, right? Well, even before that, really. Pre-internet, okay. Well, it's the internet that we know anyway. But I remember being so bored a lot of the time, right? And when you're a 12, 13, 14-year-old, you can only play so much basketball and so much this and do so much that, right? And there are times when you just kind of get bored, right? And you don't want to listen to the adults yammer on about things, right? And you get caught in these gaps. And I remember these gaps, and I remember thinking, gosh, I'm so bored, right? And it felt like this void of, I couldn't ascribe a term to it, but it was definitely void of purpose, right? When I was playing sports, I was getting a dopamine hit, just like all athletes do playing their sport. It's exciting, it's fun, you're making things happen, right? You're rocking and rolling, right? But and that, and then of course there's the fandom that can come from organized sports and things like that. It's fun, right? So fun, we try to find things that are fun to give us dopamine hits that are, that it's great, it's fine, but it's really kind of a distraction, right? A distraction for our journey to find our purpose, which is kind of interesting when you think about it, because our journey when we're young like that, we're most of us, right? There are probably some exceptions, obviously, but by and large, we don't start off on our journey of life going, well, what's my purpose, right? You might get clues about what your purpose is, right? You might have some gifts and talents early, right? So you might, let's say you're a bit of a music savant, you take up singing, and you start to sing, and then maybe you're singing in the choir and all these things, right? And you might, through this kind of a process, find that there's a healing modality. And I have to believe that there's kind of a healing modality to most things, right? Whether it be the arts or athletics or, many things, really. So much is tied into the creative, spark within us that our purpose can be revealed in following that, right? Even playing sports. To me, it was a bit like dance, right? And I'm not a dancer. Let's be clear about that. I'm not a singer, right? Either. But the artistic and athletics and all of that thing growing up was kind of our primary placeholder. Music, obviously that was fun and that was good, right? And then of course everybody gets into the proverbial trouble, right? We get into trouble. Why? Usually because we're seeking fun, and then we, go down the wrong journey, down the wrong path, right? And bad things can happen, right? And so we start out pretty much devoid of purpose as young people. And I don't believe it's until we start to mature, obviously, we start to get, higher teens and greater, people start to, you're going to school, you get your grades, you subjects also, that we're studying also help us determine. I'll give you an example of a thing that, because that was primarily just what we what the kids would call a jock back then. But I did read books, right? I wasn't like some who read voraciously, but there was plenty of rainy days where I would be bored, right? And so I grab a book and I would read it, that sort of thing. And here we are. No. You're like, why? No. But so there was that sort of thing. But where was I going with that? Oh, yes. So I think it was my senior year, beginning of my senior year, I think, and or maybe it was the end of my junior, one of those two. But we had to write this narration, but it could only be, I think it was front and back of one piece of paper, and it was a narration that had to, obviously you have the setup of this setting, and then there was dialogue, right? Also, there was dialogue in it. So it was a narration with dialogue. I can't remember exactly how that went. But bottom line is, I thought it'd be kind of fun. So, especially it was only 2 pages. How can you screw that up, right? Well, I got creative, right? A creative something kind of popped in my head, I guess. And so what it was in the story, I was like in this mansion and I was inviting people from history over for dinner. I didn't quite know this in the beginning, though, because I set it up, right? Anyway, long story short, I invited Abe Lincoln and Einstein and Gandhi, right? Some big ones. And then you always have to have that party pooper in there. Invited Hitler, right? Because I want to put a group together and have a conversation within this narration and dialogue setup or whatever. And so I did, and I actually enjoyed writing this thing, and it was fun. And I was basically painting with words, right? Let's just call it what it is. I was painting with words in my own brain. But back then, I was just caught up in it, didn't think anything of it. So, whatever. Monday comes, whatever it is, I turned in the paper and forgot about it. A couple days later, I'm off to the far right aisle, row or whatever, and I'm just, kind of myself, and I'm rather understated. You wouldn't believe it now, but I was then. And the teacher was talking to us and said, I've got all this stack of all these that you guys did, and one of them stuck out at me, and I wanted to read it for all of you. And it still wasn't. I was just like, okay, whatever. Pulls it out, sets the others down, and he starts to read it. And as soon as he gets about a line and a half into it, I realize it's mine, right? And he starts to read it. But, when I wrote it, of course I read it. And, I was cool with it. I was fine with it, whatever. But he read it in a way as if he was reading it, like reading a dramatic opening to like a movie, right? I mean, he didn't try to. He just read it in a very, had a cadence of some sort. His cadence was not rushed. Let's put it that way. Anyway, he read through it, but as he was reading through it, because I already knew the story, I was kind of listening to him, and then I kind of looked across the rest of the class to my left because I could see them all from my far right position in the class, and they were all engaged with what I had written. And so I was like, wow, that's interesting. Anyway, he finishes because, you wonder if like people are going, oh, that's stupid, whatever. It's just how we are. We're human, right? And anyway, he gets done and they liked it. And then Dan, and I was hoping he wouldn't say who wrote it, right? Because I didn't write it for any kind of attention. And then he said, "Hey, this is Steve Jones," and people were like, "Right," because I'm a jock, right? So the paradigm, right? Now, I'm not saying I'm some great writer now, for sure. That's not the case, but I will say that it did spark a part of my creativity, right? That was one of those little flash moments where you have a spark of creativity that's maybe validated, right? And in that validation, these sparks. It's kind of like an engine. You get a spark there and a spark here and a spark, spark, spark. And next thing you know, the engine of your life is moving forward, and then a purpose starts to kind of reveal itself. Fast forward, a cousin of mine, and start this video to tell you all these stories, but I will proceed. So I'm 17, and we're down at the river, and my cousin, and then her newborn son. Well, not newborn; he was a toddler, so he wasn't quite walking yet. That was key to this. And the dock, and then when the boats would go out at the river, it was just a small dock. It wasn't like a super sturdy thing, and there was a concrete embankment. It was really shallow underneath this dock. And I was jumping off the L part that shot out toward the center of the river a ways. But I was jumping off that and swimming underneath it. The dock that was L-shaped that went parallel to the cement embankment, it was, not deep under there. It was maybe 8 inches, 9 inches, if it was that. Well, the two docks, when the boats would go by, they would kind of smash together, right? They were chained up, I think. And there was probably a gap of, I don't know, too big of a gap, really, maybe 3 feet, something like that. Anyway, so I was swimming, just kind of in my own head, right? And I came up because I was going underneath the other dock, right? And come up from the other side and kind of turned, and the water is still running off of me as I kind of, I was young. I could just do the Tarzan thing. I pretty much was pulling myself up and hopped right up, but the water was, and I grabbed my towel, which was right there. So I couldn't hear because all the water was still in my face and ears and stuff. And I put the towel over my head, and as I pulled the towel, and this is where time slowed down, and I heard my cousin say, his name's Dylan. He's full grown now, by the way. Tell you how the story ends. But, or not ends, but continues. And so I'm pulling the towel down, and she says, Dylan, what had happened is that apparently he had decided to stand up and walk, right? He chose this moment. And when he did, and there was waves started coming in, and so he started in this out of control, almost like somebody falling forward and trying to keep their feet underneath them. And so he's picking up steam, so that by the time I pulled the towel down, and then, by the way, that the separation was just to my right. So he goes, just as I pull the towel down, I heard her yell, Dylan, and he goes by me, and it was like time slowed way down. And he does this perfect Superman right into the gap of those docks slamming together, okay? Now, in that side, it was only a few inches, 8 or 9 inches maybe. And he goes in, and like I said, time slowed down. He goes, almost all of his body went into the water. I reached down, and I can't really make a foot out of my hand, but if you imagine like this was the heel, I was just perfectly got him by the hook of the heel, so that when he went under, he went completely under, and then I pulled him out just as that dock comes slamming together. But if he had gone underneath that, I couldn't have got to him even if I'd have dove in the water, because he would have gone under that other dock, and it would have been ugly, right? And I pulled him out, and of course, in the moment, we're just like, oh my gosh. But in my head, I'm like, what has just happened, right? What has just happened? And I'm 17. You don't waste a lot of time assessing things and overanalyzing things. But what another spark had hit was service, serving people, helping people, right? That was a big part of, I realized that was too perfect of a situation that I couldn't, if he did that 999,000 more times, I couldn't have got him perfectly like that, perfect sequence. It happened perfectly the way it was supposed to happen, and there was a lesson there. There was an awakening there for me, right? Albeit I was young, so awakening back then didn't mean so much, right? But it did, right? But the value of service became a driver, right? So we can have a lot of these sparks that have hit our lives, but I think what happens is a lot of us don't notice them, we don't regard them, or we don't follow them, or we fall into ruts of complacency and boredom, and and then God forbid if you're running after just the dollar, and then of course life and responsibilities. We can't throw that away. I mean, obviously, if we get them, we have to take care of them, right? But paying the bills and all the things, right? but But if we didn't pay attention enough to those sparks, right? Those, the universe speaking to us, okay, the divine speaking to us through these situations, then then that those were things that were dropping seeds, right? May not sound too sexy or glorious, but dropping seeds isn't too, flashy, but then something grows from that, right? And it's no different, folks. But what happens is we get distracted. We chase the dollar. We chase the dopamine hits of, well, this will be exciting. But you have to ask yourself, is it bringing you joy? Because I kind of believe that something that's wrapped around your purpose is something that's going to fulfill you, right? It's going to fulfill you, whether it's helping other people in the manner that you do. That's a healing modality, right? Or creating things, which also what? Can heal others. It could be art. It could be music, right? It could be you build buildings. Now, this isn't to say that having a purpose is about perfection. It's not. But when we're in that early stage of purposelessness, and then we start to buy into what others say will give us purpose. Oh, go do this. This will be good. And then you'll make a lot, make good money and blah, 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 all the things, right? But that isn't part of what gave you purpose. You have to have to go back to when you were young and say, what gave me purpose back then? What did I like to do? All those things. I'm a terrible artist, but I liked to draw, cool, futuristic kind of, wild stuff. I like a little sci-fi. So I, draw a bunch of spaceships. Star Wars was a thing, right? So, of course, right? But all the different varied interests. The world sees you one way. Back then I was accepted as, a successful enough athlete, right? I was pretty okay athlete, but nobody had an expectation greater than that. None of my family knew that I even wrote that story. You know more than what any of my family now knows about writing that narration, right? Or that paper. And these are the kinds of things. There are gifts and talents and things that have been speaking to you through the divine, has been trying, some of us yelling at us, some of us whispering to us, and others of us just kind of throwing breadcrumbs out there and hope that we get to where we need to go, right? And in that process, we come into opportunities to help other people and to inspire and so forth, right? But if we don't do that, if we're not at least picking up on some of those, whisperings, right? Some of those breadcrumbs, then we're going to see everything to do with our lives as purposeless, right? And you may not even affix that to it. But if you're wondering why you need the dopamine hits of doing this and that, and distract yourself and all this and that, you got to ask yourself, what was your purpose? What was your passions and your, things when you were earlier in life that struck you, right? And did it give you joy? Did it give other people joy, right? Now, that isn't to say it's easy, right? There's nothing about playing sports is easy when you're having to go through conditioning. Anybody that's ever done that knows that it's work, right? Same thing if you've ever had to write something, I've been very fortunate that things kind of come to me, but some people not so much, right? It's just more or less work depending on who you are and what you're doing, right? And irrespective of the flavor of anybody who would read it, right? Does it bring you satisfaction? Is it bringing you joy, right? And then if we're in that state of purposelessness, now our kids and grandkids and people around us see us as not having purpose. We may even be somebody who hasn't found purpose, and there are people who are following their purpose, and we might be going, oh, I wish I had my purpose, right? And that could be the case, folks. I mean, we're humans. We fall into pockets of, we can be We can be little sour patches when we let ourselves, right? We can be curmudgeonly, for us older types. We can be curmudgeonly, right, about some things, and then get over it, of course. But go back. What's the driver of it? Where did you let go of your purpose, right? And remember, folks, following your purpose, what gives you joy and brings you and others joy and satisfaction and provision and service, doesn't require you to burn down your life as you know it, right? Now, you may have to make some tough choices. There may be people who aren't aligned with your future purpose, right? If you started out as a ballet dancer and now you want to be a wrestler in the WWE or whatever, you want to be a fighter now, there are going to be people in your family that are going to be like, oh, no, don't do that, right? And not always out of malice, but they may not support it because they don't see where the dots connect necessarily. And maybe they don't. It doesn't always have to be rational, okay? But, whatever the case may be for you, there are going to be people who go, what are you doing, right? Not other people aren't going to get your vision all the time. And the thing about a purpose is a purpose doesn't have to ask for permission. Remember that. Your purpose doesn't have to ask for permission. I don't need to ask for anybody's permission to follow my purpose. One of the things about writing the book, right? And I say right in the book, folks, early on, that if you're lacking a purpose, right, we're here to protect love. If you think about it, everything we do, whether it's creating something, art, music, you name it, just working, digging in a ditch to lay pipe, whatever it is, building a house, all the things. And in one way or the other, it's protecting love. But the challenge that goes above and beyond this sort of a purpose, when you put it in those terms, it allows you to define the particulars of what that means for you. So we are here to protect love, but I am here to do this. And then somebody else is going to say, well, I'm here to do this. This is these are my gifts and talents and et cetera, right? And so on and so forth around the room and all over, all over the place, right? But the culmination of it is we're here to protect love. Now, that's purposelessness to finding purpose, right? But what isn't a part of purpose? What isn't a valid purpose? Anything that hurts others, right? Hurts their sovereignty, right? Everybody needs their sovereignty to pursue what? What their gifts and talents and or find those gifts and talents that allow them to protect love. Because when they do that, they're also protecting love in your life. You see how this comes back around? It is never ending, folks. It is never ending. Love is never ending. It's perpetual, okay? It's a perpetual machine. So when we started out, and maybe you're not that young, maybe you're, mid path in life or whatever. Maybe you're, further on in life and you still feel like, I just feel like I don't have a purpose. You probably have a purpose. You probably have been fulfilling a purpose, but you have been looking through the wrong lens at your gifts and talents and how you're carrying those things out. So you may just need to step back and go, okay, what am I doing that's of value here? How am I protecting love? Ask the question, make a list, right? I'm a list person. How am I protecting love, right? And start listing it down. Well, I take care of my kids, my family, and this is what I do for that. And you might be a cook, you might be a chef. I'm not. I wish I was, but I'm not. But you might have all of these sorts of things that you do that bring joy. You bring baked goods to people. You know what? People work in the bakery. That's a purpose, right? I don't even have to eat the food, right? Because it's not always super healthy for me. But I can smell it, and it smells so good. And I go, great. And then I can leave and smell. That satisfies that dopamine hit, right? There was a time. But do you see what I'm saying? You might be a person who comes up with new and creative ways to make things that are that, pleasing to the nose and to the taste buds, but are also healthy, right? There's those sorts of purpose too, right? That's think of it this way, folks. If you're taking something and from a simple something or a few somethings, you're making something more, right? We may call that chemistry, but it's alchemy, right? It's alchemy. Taking these few ingredients, right, and you're making this. I don't care if you're making a sub sandwich, right? You're taking a few ingredients, you're putting it together in this unique, special way, right? And everybody makes sandwiches differently, right? This is the fun thing about sandwiches. How do we get back to food, Steve? But, purpose, right? Food, right? And when we sit around and share a meal, right, with others, when we do that, what are we doing? We have conversation and then create connection. That food is now a vehicle to what? Help to build connections and strengthen connections, and sometimes iron out, misunderstandings as well, right? It's not always going to be pretty, right? Sometimes it might be you have to go to the doctor for a thing, or you have to, the dentist, right? Nobody goes, hey, yeah, I'm excited. I need to go to the dentist tomorrow. Not because we hate dentists, but because generally there's a discomfort involved. It may not be the worst, but it may not be the best either, right? So these are the things we have to kind of keep in mind, is that there aren't a lot of rules around it, except that it should be bringing joy to your life and the life of others around you. Maybe it's bringing joy to your life so that everything else you do brings joy to the people around you, right? So if you're somebody who likes to paint, and now that you paint, you're just a happier person, and now other people are benefiting from that, right? Think of it this way. The joy that it brings you is now a joy that comes out of you, right? So didn't want to get too far off in the weeds, and I went a little longer telling stories, if you stuck around this far, I'm glad you did. Hopefully you got something out of it, right? If you're feeling like there's a void, you got some anxieties and a void there and all that stuff, pan back in your mind, close your eyes, think of, I'm here to protect love. How do I do that now? Okay. Maybe I do it in these few simple ways. I take care of my animals. I do, I grow things, whatever. I do the work that I do, blah, blah, blah. People appreciate it. Okay, fine. It's a start. And then what did I used to do? Or what do I want to do? It may be brand new. It may be a whole new adventure in life for you out there. Why? Because you're like, oh, I heard this guy. He's talking about, we're here to protect love. What are some other ways I can go out and protect love? Well, people need food, people need water, people need shelter, people need a lot of things out in the world. There isn't a limit on what you can do to protect love. It is literally a limitless purpose that you can step into and bring your brand of creativity, energy, and love to it. So I invite you to do so. And have fun doing it too, right? If you can have fun doing something, that just brings more joy to the situation. So hopefully you're having a fantastic day, folks. We'll wrap this up. Remember, hit that good green domino 3 to 5 times a day or more to uplift, motivate, inspire, and just encourage one another. When we do this, not only are we helping to transform culture, but we're transforming our own lives. But don't forget, we can't transform anything on the outside if we're not first willing to transform on the inside. So important. All right, folks, have a fantastic day. Hit like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, we'll talk to you later.